there are really 5 key points. One is to take extraordinary advantage of our energy resources. I have a very different view than the president on oil, coal, natural gas, renewables, nuclear. Energy, number 1. Number 2, trade, opening up trade, particularly in Latin America. Number 3, convincing the world that we are on track to have a balanced budget. That's critical. Number 4, human capital. And by that I mean training programs for adults as well as better schools for kids. And number 5, restore economic freedom by keeping our tax rates down, get regulators to see themselves as the allies of enterprise, not the enemies. These things, if we do these things, you'll see America's economy come roaring back.
All right, a very good start. I'm glad he unfurled it right here on the Kudlow Report. But you know me, I think it can be a little stronger. Now, here's a thought. Mitt Romney is a turnaround guy, right? He's an expert. That's what he did for a living. So I think an important message from him would emphasize how he will turn around this failed company called USA Government, Inc. and save it from bankruptcy. That's point number 1. And second, since growth and prosperity are the top priorities, here are my ideas to slightly reprioritize the governor's 5 policy points. For example, first, strong pro-growth tax and regulatory reforms would top my list. In other words, real supply-side growth measures across the board. Number 2, lower spending and move towards a balanced budget. Put that number 2. Number 3, domestic energy development. I'm moving that one down a little bit. Number 4, now, since we all agree on improved education, I would take that out altogether and in its place put in King Dollar, sound dollar. This is going to give businesses and consumers more spending firepower. And finally, number 5, trade expansion. I'm all for it. Free trade is a tax cut. All right, this 5-point plan emphasizes Romney's turnaround credentials and offers a succinct Reagan-esque growth message. I'm just doing some tweaking here with all due respect. And of course, as always, I'm trying to be helpful. Now, let's bring in our distinguished panel. CNBC contributor Ari Melber is a correspondent for The Nation magazine, townhall.com political editor Guy Benson, and former Bush 41 White House aide Joe Watkins. Ari, you're surrounded, so I'm going to give you the first take on the Kudlow tweaking of the Romney message, and in particular, his turnaround skills. We need a turnaround.
Well, first of all, we may have the makings of a Romney-Kudlow ticket here because you have such strong views about where he should go.
Unveil tonight. All to see.
But, you know, he was here last night. Maybe he'll come back, talk to you some more. I think that the big problem there that I see is when you look at the overall tax plan he's put forward, it cuts $900 billion out of the federal budget. Some people think that's a good thing, but if you're going to be honest with the public about a turnaround and what you're doing, you're not going to have human capital programs of any scale when you're cutting what amounts to 1 out of every $4 in the budget. So you can be a big cutter, and I know people like that, but then you can't go around promising everything. That was a problem for Mitt Romney in Massachusetts. You touched on that in your interview last night because he couldn't own up to the fact that you put forward, which was he did sign a permanent assault weapons ban in '94. I think that's a good thing. It concerns me that on the economic policy and on the gun policy, he can't keep a straight answer.
By the way, I actually think it's a good thing, too. I actually think it's a good thing. I may be chastised in some quarters for that. Guy Benson, let me get your take on my tweaks of Romney's plan. And I just want to say this. The thing that bothered me a little bit was the idea, he called it economic freedom. Now, he did say economic freedom, meaning keep taxes low. And he had this sort of odd phrase about regulators see themselves as the allies of enterprise. I don't think regulators will ever see themselves as the allies of enterprise. That's not what federal regulators do.
They might say that, but they don't really believe
it. Reagan used to talk right at the top about across-the-board tax cuts and deregulation to help business. That's kind of what I'm getting at with Mr. Romney.
Yeah, well, he is proposing across-the-board tax cuts, and with all due respect to my friend Ari, I think that a lot of Americans don't see as tax cuts taking money out of the budget. They see it as having more money that they've earned for themselves to spend as they see fit, which spurs growth. But I want to go back to your point on the turnaround, which I think is really important. Governor Romney is going to be at the Olympics on Friday in London. I think that's an important optics moment for him, not just being abroad as a presidential candidate, but it also calls to mind the massive turnaround he did at the Salt Lake City Olympics in 2002. It was tarred by horrible scandal and corruption, deeply in debt. He came around and turned it into a giant American success.
Why doesn't he say that directly? Joe, go to you. What he ought to say on this point, it's a great point. I turned around the Olympics. I'm going to turn around this country from bankruptcy, and I'm going to turn it around from the lousy recovery or quasi-recession we're in. In other words, why isn't he more? This is the point. At Morning Joe's this morning, John Holloman and I were talking about this very point. There's a very important point. Why doesn't he hit harder at his natural skill set, which is being a turnaround guy?
I think Americans are gaining more and more confidence in Mitt Romney as a guy who can turn around this mess that we're in right now. And all the polling data that I've seen shows that it is. I mean, he's beating President Obama on all those issues having to do with being able to better handle the economy. But he's not a boastful person, and doesn't want to talk about what he's done in the past so much. He's done some great things in the past. He's been a turnaround person. He's done great things with venture capital and private equity. He's did a great job with the Olympics. He was a great governor of a state. But more importantly, he's concerned with.
What do you mean he's not a boastful?
Well, I think he
says
more,
it all the time.
He's more concerned.
Obama's panning the living daylights out of him for Bain Capital, and he's making a defense. And he uses the Olympics as a defense. I'm actually saying he ought to do it more. He's got to fight back harder on this.
Well, clearly, the fight is just beginning. I mean, this is a time when more Americans are paying attention to what's going on. And for 23 million Americans who are unemployed or underemployed, they're really paying attention. Because for them, what really matters is not so much your political party, but whether or not you can put them back to work.
Here's the thing. Can I just say that the reason why he's not boastful is he's not always sure what he's proud of. That's his biggest problem. He used to boast about health care reform. Now he doesn't. You know what Americans like about Gordon Gekko? They like that he knows where he stands, okay?
They like the fact that he was a greedy son of a bitch and all he wanted to do was make money. You're not comparing Mitt Romney
I wouldn't do that.
I'm going to take out my semi-automatic from you. That is a terrible thing.
But would Gordon Gekko ever say to anyone, oh, we did that up to this year, but then we didn't do it anymore. I was only CEO part of the time. That's not leadership.
That's diversion. It's diversion. It's diversion. I mean, if all the Obama campaign can do is talk about his time, when did he leave Bain Capital? Was it February of 1999 or was it 2001 or 2002? That's a bogus argument. Talk about the economy. Talk about how you're going to put American people back to work, how you're going to reduce the regulatory burden on companies so they can hire folks. Talk about how you're going to lower taxes, how you're going to, for people with an adjusted gross income under $200,000, you're going to cut out taxes on capital gains and interest and dividends.
You know what's
That's what Mitt Romney said.
Okay, I basically agree with everything you said as a supply sider. But, Guy, he kind of says it, Mr. Romney, but he doesn't exactly say it. In other words, last night I gave him ample opportunity, okay? I'm not here to hatchet the guy. I want to get his point of view out. So he wants to keep taxes down. That's good. He doesn't talk in specifics about capital gains and dividends. He didn't mention his 20% across-the-board tax cut, which I think is a fine idea if he can pay for it by getting rid of the upper-end deduction. In other words, are you one of the conservatives that feel Mitt is not aggressive enough? I hear that from a lot of conservatives. Are you one?
I think on some level, sometimes, but I think the "you didn't build that" controversy, which was not taken out of context, and the new Obama ad is hilarious, where he's saying, of course people built their businesses. Well, that's not what you spent a minute and a half saying in full context, Mr. President. I think that lit a fire under this Mitt Romney, and I hadn't seen him really hitting the trail the way he did with this.
By the way, I thought that was one of his strongest moments in the interview we had. As soon as I raised that, it's
very good. But here's what I would say also, if I'm Romney. I say, the reason that I was successful at Bain is because I am a turnaround guy, and if you don't believe me, ask former Obama advisor Steve Ratner, who said that we were superb, or ask President Clinton, who said that my private sector experience was sterling. He said, and we can talk about Bain all we want, and when I left Bain, I shouldn't be held responsible for things that happened afterwards, but what's your idea here, Mr. President? I mean, it seems like Obama's big solution for job growth in this country is to raise taxes on job creators.
He said it again today. This is a wonderful story. Out in Oakland, California, where they have a 13.7% unemployment rate. He said, my plan is working. What plan is working? What's working? I don't get any of that stuff. I mean, if he wants to say that, that's great, but it'll cost him the election.
I think if you go to Detroit, which is a real proof positive contrast, where you had Mitt Romney say he's so afraid of government doing things that he didn't want to bail anything out.
You mean because of the Republican governor, Snyder? That's why Detroit.
Well, no, and I think the Republican...
all those dealers were laid off, the automobile dealers were laid off.
I think if you look at Chrysler and you look at the big three, the Republican governor himself would say, thank goodness the federal government was there. There are big differences between these two guys. To go back to one other point, though, I don't think Mitt Romney getting excited about Obama's gaffe is the kind of leadership he's going to need. People know three things about him. He was a liberal governor, he ran this thing called Bain, and he rescued the Olympics. He's got one left. He's lucky we're in Olympic season because so far the other two have not worked.
You've got to give Mitt Romney credit. He goes to the NAACP, clearly not a friendly audience. He lays out his plan to put people back to work because African Americans are at the highest rate of unemployment ever at 14.4%. Joe Biden comes by the next day, and the only defense he has to offer to people of color is they want to make Barack Obama a one-term president. He doesn't offer a plan for how you get people back to work, and all he says is they want to make Barack Obama a one-term president, and he says it to a thunderous applause. At the end of the day, the president has to have a plan for putting people who are hurting, no matter what color they are, back to work.
And he wouldn't show up.
I just got to say, though, briefly.
He wouldn't even show up. And Romney, at the end of the speech, got a standing ovation.
He did indeed.
Because of some of his points that crowd listened
I just have to correct, though, on the facts. We have a Jobs Act bill. Bloomberg News called it tax cut heavy. It never got a vote in the House. The House found time for 33 votes to repeal health care, but it never got a vote. Now, you may disagree on the plans, but this talking point that there's no plan is not fair.
It's a second stimulus. It's a second stimulus that couldn't even get out of the Democrat-controlled Senate. And by the way, your shots at Romney, he left office in Massachusetts with 4.7% unemployment, and on Bain, and I mean, I think that we saw a new poll that came out just yesterday from Gallup that showed
the Jobs Act got a majority.
63% of
the Jobs Act got a majority of votes.
People respect him on Bain. Okay, listen, I'm just trying to be helpful and give him a few ideas about coordinating and message. It's what I do for a living. Ari Melber, thank you. Guy Benson, thank you. Joe Watkins, we appreciate it very much. Come